Okay, guys, now we're going to talk about the endocrine system, which is the system of your body that has to do with hormones and the glands that secrete them. Hormones are incredibly important. They regulate almost all of your body processes. So let's get into it. So, as I was saying, glands that produce hormones to regulate homeostasis through feedback loops and function in growth, changes and development, maturation, metabolism, sexual development, and regulation of the sexual cycle. This is the actual definition of the endocrine system. And regulating homeostasis is something that our bodies have to do in order to survive. It's basically keeping all of the conditions inside of our body regular. Our hormones are chemical messengers. They are picked up by blood capillaries. Target areas describe organs or tissues that receive the hormones. Hormones circulate all tissues but only activate target cells. So think of the hormone as the actual message that your body is trying to send, and the target area as the place it needs to get to, like sending a letter to a mailbox. An example, ACTH receptors are only found on certain cells in the adrenal cortex, versus thyroxine receptors are on nearly all cells in the human body. So I have a few images to show you. Target cell for hormone A. You can see that it's specialized to only pick up hormone A in this case, which is the yellow diamond. A target cell for hormone B, which is a different shape, so it's like comparing two different hormones. And then there are target cells that are capable of picking up multiple hormones. In this case, examples both A and B. So certain areas, target areas, are specialized to pick up specific hormones, but it doesn't mean that a target area can not pick up more than one. Some of them pick up multiple, depending on how important the function of a certain area is. There can be many, many, many hormones picked up in that area. So hormones create feedback loops. It's a really efficient way of solving a problem. Positive feedback loops are ones that start out very small and they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. The hormones attach to their target areas and it releases more signals that then release more signals that then release more signals, kind of like an allergy attack. What happens in a positive feedback loop is that there's the original input to the system that creates an output that then feeds the system again to create more output, like an exponential growth curve. In negative feedback reactions, it's more of a balancing act. It's trying to fix something that has gotten out of balance. Like a seesaw. You want it to return to completely horizontal instead of having it tipping somewhere. In that case, the input goes to the system, to the output, that goes to the system, to the output. Same kind of motion. Positive feedback loops, yeah, just as what I was saying earlier, I think I probably spoke ahead of myself. It's exacerbating feedback, which is just a fancy way of saying that it is feedback that grows on itself. It just keeps growing. It moves the system away from equilibrium, which goes against homeostasis for a purpose. A wonderful example is childbirth. So I have this image, and it even describes the whole pathway for you. So whenever the baby grows to a very satisfactory size, according to your body, it will take up a certain amount of space in the uterus, and eventually a stretch receptor is activated by this growth, or this motion. And when the stretch receptors are activated, it signals the brain for the release of oxytocin, and the oxytocin causes uterine muscles to contract. When they contract, it reactivates the stretch receptors, and so your brain will signal for another release of oxytocin, which will cause the uterine muscles to contract again. So these are the contractions, and they get stronger and stronger until the baby is finally delivered, until your body literally removes the baby out into the world. And there's a more dumbed down, without really imagery version, in case you're more literal, more left-brained. You see pressure of child on cervix, contractions begin, more pressure on the cervix, oxytocin released, more contractions, more oxytocin released, more contractions, more oxytocin released, until the baby is born. Excuse me. Then we have negative feedback loops, like a seesaw, of balancing feedback. It is self-regulating. An increased output from a system inhibits future production by the system. And it controls a homeostatic response. The example is your blood calcium levels. So your blood has a lot more than just blood cells and plasma in it. There's tiny, tiny particles, molecules of specific things. Calcium is one of those. And there's a normal amount of calcium in your blood system, but certain things can trigger an imbalance. Whenever an imbalance happens and there are rising levels of calcium in your blood system, your thyroid gland, which is a very important gland for your development, releases calcitonin. And calcitonin exists to help reduce the amount of calcium in your blood by depositing it in your bones. So calcitonin stimulates calcium salt deposit in your bone. And this happens, and this keeps happening, and it keeps happening until there's another imbalance, and your CO2 and your calcium levels fall. Your thyroid gland releases PTH from the parathyroid glands, and this causes osteoclasts to degrade bone matrix and release calcium back into your blood. And so this is how it regulates homeostasis. It happens all the time, every day, in very, very, I guess you could, relatively small amounts, because it's just something that has to be maintained. And it's maintained by your thyroid gland. So that's important to remember. But that's a really, really good example of a negative feedback loop if I ask you about one in the future. So hormone imbalances, they can be pretty common. A lot of conditions are caused by hormone imbalances. A lot of really natural things that everyone goes through is caused, oh my gosh, by hormone imbalances. There are anomalies, though. Gigantism is caused by a tumor on the pituitary gland, causing the overproduction of growth hormone. So your pituitary gland is what regulates your growth hormone, and if a tumor gets on there, it can really inhibit the physiology of your gland, and it will have just unregulated growth hormone entering your body, which then causes you to become massive. Robert Wadlow was 8 foot, 11.1 inches. Look how he's pictured here. Look how huge he is compared to these other people. 8 foot, 11.1 inches. He had a size 37 shoe. I thought my size 13 was big. No, ma'am. Not like this. That cane. Unfortunately, people with gigantism usually suffer some pretty severe health problems, and they don't tend to live very long, which is sad. So this is a list of what I would consider to be like the most important, relatively, glands in your body. It's not a complete list, but I will be pulling questions for the next practical, for the next quizzes, for your writing assignments based on some of these. This will be another big memorization type thing. Just make sure that you can connect the hormones produced to the gland. The rest of it is fairly common knowledge. If not, it's easy to remember. So the first few are in your brain. the hypothalamus, which produces antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, your pineal gland, which releases melatonin, your pituitary gland, anterior, which just does so much. Look at all this: thyroid stimulating hormone, thyrotropin, growth hormone, somatotropin, prolactin, lutotropin, 2 gonadotropins, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last one because it escapes me at the moment, but it's ACTH. That's what I usually call it. The pituitary gland, the posterior, stores hormones from the hypothalamus. The thyroid gland produces T3, T4, calcitonin. Parathyroid gland produces the parathyroid hormone and parathormone. Thymus gland, thymosin. Pancreas, insulin. That's something you probably have heard about. Glucagon and somatostatin. Whoa. Your adrenal gland in the medulla. Your adrenal, yes, top of the kidneys. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Your adrenal gland itself, the cortex, which corticosteroid, glucocorticoid, sex hormones. The ovary, sex hormones, estrogens, progesterone. Testes, sex hormones, testosterone. Kidney, renin, calcitriol. The heart, but you didn't know that one. The heart produces the atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP, as it's typically referred to. And then your adipose tissue, the fat in your body, produces leptin. So there's just a lot to remember. A lot of them are easy to remember because the names are very similar. Or if not, you probably are familiar with the hormones that they produce. So it shouldn't be too difficult to memorize. So we're going to get into some anatomy now. This is just to help you picture where everything is. You can see your pineal gland, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary gland. They're all very small structures. And it's kind of hard to see here. I might upload a better picture later. But there's a small white gland that's the hypothalamus. This small gray one is the pituitary on the bottom. And over to the left, that brownish one is the pineal gland. This is just a close-up of what I was showing you before. The anterior pituitary gland and the posterior pituitary gland. The hypothalamus, you can see where everything is specifically. From this slide, I didn't put it in the top corner, but it would just be good to recognize posterior versus anterior pituitary gland. The different shapes and where they are. It's almost like a yin and yang kind of structure. You can see the capillaries that would transport the hormones on top of them. Some more continuing, looking at the thyroid, which is in your throat, and the parathyroid. And up close, these pictures are not amazing. But you get the picture. On a practical, I would probably use the left image more since it's clearer. Looking at your kidneys with the adrenal gland, rests right on top. You know what a kidney is. This is the structure. Cool. By the way, George is the name of this model, this body model that we have. It's not a proper name at all, so you don't have to recognize George's abdominal inserts as anything. The pancreas is a very large structure compared to the rest of these glands. Okay. Then we have male and female reproductive. All I would ask for you to recognize is testes and ovary. So you can largely ignore the rest of it for now. We're going to touch on the specific structures later. I think it's the last thing we go over, actually. But just recognize the testes and the ovary if you don't already recognize them. And that's all I have to show for now. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, leave a comment, like. Oh my gosh.